Audio.
The biggest struggle we all face, honestly, is to find the place on any given day where you can try your hardest.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Devlin, and welcome back to The Struggle. I hope you're having an awesome day. How are you? You good? I'm good. I'm psyched, actually, to be training hard. It's summertime. I've got this great conversation here for you today with Matt Samet, who is also training hard in the summertime in his garage, and I really enjoyed this conversation with Matt. Matt, you probably recognize his name. He was an editor of Climbing Magazine for a long time. He's written a million articles for them. Some of my favorite climbing articles of all time have been written by Matt. I'll link to some of those. And he's also a heck of a crusher. He's climbed up to 514B and V11. And he's a dad and a weekend warrior. He loves to develop routes and has hundreds of FAs around. He actually prefers to climb routes that he's put up himself. And so we talk about some of the projects he's been working on in this conversation. It was a really good talk. I think you're going to get a lot from it. Apologies for my audio. I think my microphone was going bad. Just after this interview, I got a new microphone, and so my audio is like a little rough. It's a little haggard, but fortunately, Matt's microphone was really good, and he does most of the talking. So sorry for that, and I think I might have been fighting a cold as well. I hope you are not fighting a cold. I hope you're doing awesome and feeling really good about all of your climbing that you're doing. Matt and I talk a lot about training and how he's training. He's been working with Nina Williams as a coach for many years now, and he also opened up in a couple points in this conversation here, really personally about some of the struggles that he's had throughout his climbing life and just personal life, from disordered eating to addiction, and now to the tools that he's using to live a more healthy life on and off the rock. I just enjoyed every second of this. It's real, it's crusty, it's stoked, and I'm so glad you're here for it. And before we dive in with Matt, just a quick little update from my world, because why not? It's my podcast. I get to share what I'm working on. And right now I'm working on building some fitness, some endurance. If you haven't heard last week's episode with Coach Eric Hurst, The Road to 13A, Part 4, I think it was, I recommend you dip into that, especially if you're a route climber. But even if you're a boulderer, Eric talks a lot about energy systems training. And one of the things I think I got wrong last season was I just focused a lot on developing power, which I'm very weak at, and Matt and I talk a lot about this in this interview. But I kind of left aerobic fitness a little bit atrophied, if you will. And at the Red River Gorge, that is not a mistake I'm going to make again. So I'm focusing a lot right now in the summertime here on building that aerobic fitness. Spending a lot of time on the treadwall at the gym and doing 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off on my little spray wall in my basement, because that's super convenient, and something that you'll hear today. Matt talks a lot about the benefits of having some sort of setup at your house, even if it's just a hangboard, and how you can get training in even in the busy days. So it's been busy. Kids are getting back to school here pretty soon, and that'll allow me more time to focus here on this podcast and on my training. And anyway, glad you're here. Thank you so much for your support. We have a banger bonus episode with Matt that I'll tell you more about at the end here. But first, let's talk shop with Matt Samet.
I managed to climb 3 or 4 days a week, which is about as much as most of us can handle anyway. But yeah, I think in the meantime, I have to balance that with obviously earning a living and being present for my kids. I'm at an age in life too where it would probably be less appealing to be in a van all the time anyway. Although I know people who've retired and done that, but usually they worked a job for 30 years, their kids are through college, they're free and clear, and they sort of can go back to that free lifestyle. So yeah, I think I probably represent a lot of your listeners in that I'm trying to balance, work, family, climbing, training, all of it.
You're doing it all at a really high level. I'm excited to jump in. Because you're doing it all doesn't necessarily mean that it's coming easy, and this is the struggle. So we love embracing and exploring the struggle. Let's start there, my man. You've listened to the show, so you know the routine here. What does struggle mean to you?
I knew you were going to ask this question. I don't think I have a canned answer. I think in climbing, no matter what level you climb at, I think the biggest struggle that I've seen in myself and in all my climbing partners And then just everyone, I've worked in climbing media and interviewed a lot of people and written profiles. And I think the biggest struggle we all face, honestly, is to find the place on any given day where you can try your hardest. I think that is one of the most difficult things. And I don't think we really think about it. We think about the components that go into it: fitness, diet, training, conditions, all that. And we, maybe hyper focus on one of those aspects or more to the exclusion of the larger picture. But I think the hardest thing, for me, the biggest pleasure in climbing is being able to give my best effort. Like whether it fails or succeeds is immaterial. It's that feeling of trying your hardest. And I think the struggle, at least for me, is just finding that on any given day. I always try to, but obviously we don't always. There's crappy days where the excuses mount up or things just aren't going your way and you feel like you can't even try. And then you're like, why am I doing this? But I think when you can find that, and I'm sure it's close to what is sort of labeled the flow state in a way, that's when climbing is most interesting.
Are you more in tune with that now, that kind of struggle, as well as like the awareness of what leads to a better day versus a crappy day than you were when you were climbing in your 20s or 30s? Can you juxtapose that lens from your earlier days of climbing?
Yeah, I think I am. And I think a lot of that is just time at the rock. If you're trying routes that are hard for you, you're going to be failing like 99% of the time, right? And if you fail to learn from that, then you really are failing. Like if you don't learn anything from any of those experiences, then you're never going to grow in the sport and as a person. But yeah, I think I've learned a lot of the things that conspire against me, and I've learned to listen to them. Like in my 20s, I would just do dumb stuff at the crag, like not bring enough water. And then the afternoon hits and you're dehydrated and cranky and your muscles are cramping up and you're just like, oh, I'm climbing like shit. And, I used to have these fits, it was back in the 90s, everyone was having fits, and they get worse, right? When you're dehydrated because you're really grumpy. And then I finally started to realize, oh, I'm just not like drinking enough water. Like it's a pretty simple thing, but it took me till I was like 42 or 43 to realize, oh, I need to just kind of be hydrated throughout the day, like consistently hydrated, not just like, because I'm too caught up in the climbing or it's cold out and I'm not thirsty, stop drinking water. And then the afternoon hits. So yeah, I think it's things like that come from experience, also conditions, like not trying to press through when it's clearly not going your way. If it's too cold or too hot, like insisting that you're going to try to send something when you probably aren't, just saying, what, I'll lower the bar and try a different route today, or I'll just try sections of this route. Like the other day I was up in the Flatirons, and it's been a weird, cold, windy, kind of scuddy spring out here. It's already May and we're still not really getting those warm days where you can get out in the morning and it's nice and cool. And went to the same route 2 days in a row, and both days it was cold and windy. And, the first day we just kind of improved the staging area and the trail below the wall until it warmed up enough to climb. And then the second day it was the same thing. And instead of just being like, screw this, let's go straight to the gym, we just tried to do like 4 or 5 moves at a time. Just do as many moves as you can until you numb out, and then just hang and, and not be mad about it. Like, right. You could be up there and be like, damn it, this sucks. This isn't fair. I need a nice day so I can give a good burn. Or you can just be like, we walked an hour uphill. Let's do something. And I think that's maybe the one thing that comes with longevity in the sport, is that you stop trying to swim against the current.
Well, I actually want to peel back on a few of the things that you just touched on there as we get down into the tactics chapter, maybe a little bit in the mental game as well, as we're talking about how we process things when they're not going our way. But you seem to really like training, at least from as I've followed along with you in your writing, and for those of us who are juggling careers and families, and that oftentimes training is what's more readily available than spending full days out at the crag anyway. But let's explore your training a little bit here. Let's start through the lens of struggle. And where do you struggle with your training, Matt, or what has been a struggle for you over time?
Well, I'm not naturally like a very powerful climber. I'm not like a fast twitch guy. I'm probably naturally sort of always gravitated towards longer endurance routes. Like you have out at the Red, like that mother lode style, or
totally
any of those caves, the treadmill, or rifle too, which has, very long routes with, hard cruxes, but you can just like throw your knee in and rest and dumb it down. And, you sort of climb to your strengths. I think we all do for a long time in your climbing career. And then eventually you'll hit a ceiling with that, or you'll start to regress because you're not confusing your muscles. You're not learning anything new neurologically, and you're just sort of falling back on the same tricks. So I think the biggest struggle I faced in my training was how to address that. And especially as I hit my mid to late 40s and was still kind of like doing the same stuff, like find a pumpy route, dial in the moves, climb it or not. But I was starting to come up, I've been in Boulder since 91, and I was just starting to come up against getting on routes and not being able to do the moves. Like, I'm just not strong enough to do these moves. It doesn't really matter if I'm pumped or not. I think Tony Yaniro, one of the leading climbers in the 80s and 90s, he had a classic quote. He was trying Scarface out in Smith Rock, has that really hard crux on a mono, and he had simulated, he went out there with tinfoil and molded the mono and the other holds around it so he could build the sequence on his home wall on his Woody. And I think someone asked him, why are you doing that? Why don't you just climb on the route and get fitness on it and better endurance? He's like, if I can't do the moves, there's nothing to endure. And I think that's a classic quote. And it really sort of hit me in my mid to late 40s. I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter how much endurance I have. I need to address this huge deficit. And I was climbing with Nina Williams and Cayman Brack. We're all down there in 2018 trying a route. And yeah, it had like a kind of a moonboard jump on it. Like you get a couple crimps and dyno to this huge Waco. And I just could not do it. And it was hard, but it wasn't the world's hardest move. And she was watching me on it. And at that point, she had just started getting into coaching. And she's like, you know what? You really need to work on your power. And I was like, I know. And I tried the route flail. Watched her like flash it, just float it. I was like, okay, she knows what she's talking about. I mean, I always knew that. Nina's a very strong, very talented climber. So I've worked with her over the past 6 years, I guess, to get a training program to address that.
So what did she program for you, or what have you been focusing on? This is something that I can relate to as a pumpy Red River Gorge climber. I'm constantly, when I test, like whether it's like a lattice test or whatever, left on the bell curve, where I'm essentially climbing at a higher grade than my raw kind of strength or power metrics might suggest. So I feel like there's plenty of opportunity for me here, but there's no shortage of paths that one can take. So what's been working for you, and how have you been training up that power?
Well, this was back in 2018, and Nina gave me, I think, a 3-month training program. And one of the foundations of it was moonboarding, which I hadn't, I used to boulder a lot outside. Like when I grew up in New Mexico, down in Albuquerque, there's a lot of granite boulders right above town in the foothills. And it's not the most powerful style, but it's very fingery and crimpy. So I think doing that, you can keep your fingers tuned up. And then here around Boulder, there's Flagstaff Mountain, which is like roadside. Same sort of thing, kind of crimpy, pebbly. Keeps your fingers strong. Maybe they're not the most powerful, not the steepest. And then there's obviously a ton of bouldering around the Front Range, the granite and stuff. But as I've gotten older, I just lost interest in that. So I mostly just gym boulder. But as you know, on gym sets, you're constrained by what they've set. And it just seems to follow, especially these days, it just seems to follow these templates that I don't think are that valuable for actually getting stronger. It can be fun, but, jumping around on sloping blobs, I don't know. Who cares? And then they'll have like kind of your good fitness problems, which are good for power endurance. And then, there'll be things with very hard moves, but I don't know about you, but I find those problems to be very binary. Like either fit into the move or you don't. Like I think some of a height thing, but obviously also a strength thing. But sometimes you just look at it like it doesn't really matter. Like I can come back to this 6 days in a row. I'm gonna have the same result every time. But I think with the boards, right, the light up boards, you can really calibrate and customize your training. And there's just so many problems. Tens of thousands of problems. You're never going to run out of options. You don't like a problem, swipe right. You don't like what's benchmarked, find your own problem. So I started moonboarding. Nina gave me moonboarding, max hangs, weighted pull-ups, your standard building blocks. But the thing I think that I keep coming back to, whether I'm in a training cycle or not, is moonboarding.
In taking it back, so in 2018, what were you on the 2016 moonboard? And essentially what grade of problems were projecting or working on at that time? And how's the progression been over the past 6 years now?
I actually started on the 2017 set because that's what they have at the Boulder Rock Club, which is the local gym. I remember Nina saying, I'm going to give you a lot of moonboarding. And she said, you're going to hate it and you're probably going to hate me. And I was like, oh, I don't know. I can boulder. And I got on that thing. My first day on the thing, I got my ass kicked. I mean, big time. Kind of like everyone, but, you know, in a way that I don't think I knew about the moonboard, but I didn't really know of its reputation. So 2017 was, you know, the set with the red holds and some wood, and then the whites and blacks and yellows from 2016. Yeah, the first day, you know, I went in there with probably like somewhat of an arrogant attitude, like, oh, I can climb V5, 6, 7. I should be flashing it. And I was getting my ass kicked on V3s, you know, on the easiest problems on the board. So it took 2 or 3 sessions to even be able to sort of move up the thing. Just the jumpy style, that 40-degree angle, the size of the holds, getting used to not having your feet pick on the kicker, like recruiting the core tension to keep your hips into the wall, you know, the jumping, which was obviously a huge deficiency and, you know, is something you can warm up to, but wasn't really something I'd done. It's like an enduro pig, you know, I was looking to basically just dick everything down to like V1, get a knee bar in where I could, shake out. And suddenly here's this board. It's like, it's just raw energy. Like you got to try. All it is trying. So it took a while, but then that first year I started doing that training program in early 2019. By the early summer, I put in a wall in my garage because I got so psyched on moonboarding. So I was working at climbing then and worked out with Grasshopper and Moon to sort of get a wall for the magazine, you know, conveniently in my garage. But everyone who worked at climbing, we all did use it, and it's still anyone can use it, you know, who's at climbing or part of that crew. But yeah, it's like 30 feet from where we're sitting right now, and it's of huge benefit to have it that close. And having it that close has certainly let me progress. You know, I've had the 2017 set on, the 2016, the 2019 was on there for quite a while, which I think is the hardest set. And honestly, it was hard to see progress on there other than getting stronger, but progress through the grades on 2019, it's so sandbagged. I mean, you know, Ben Moon himself had a post on Instagram basically saying enough's enough. And now I have 2024 on there. So I don't know which, you moonboard a fair bit, right? Which set do you climb on?
So at the gym that I go to, it's interesting. So we've got 2 gyms here in Louisville, and kind of together they cobble together a passable gym experience. And one of them has 2017 at a 25 degree, and one of them had 2016 at the 40 degree. Then now it's 2019. And then I sessioned with Ravioli, went out and filmed some things with him in his garage on the 2024. So I've tried them all. Really like the 2024, maybe because it's maybe more simulative of some of the stuff that I climb at the Red, because there's some cool like pockets and stuff with those new blue holds that they've got on there. I like those. But like, it is interesting having a 25 degree and a 40 degree because I can pick and choose based on the project that I'm working on.
Okay.
But if I'm just trying to train raw power, which is really what the tool is built for, then I get on the 40 degree and it doesn't really matter. I mean, I have the hardest time on the easiest problems, even still. I mean, I've done a handful of V5s on this 19, but, you know, mostly I'm kind of in that V4 range, and it's all about style and, you know, where my strengths are as a climber, which there aren't that many on that type of apparatus. But, you know, I have a goal. I have a goal this summer to really focus on strength and power, and maybe I'll push up and take my first V6. We'll see.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, 2019 is so hard. You know, there's this like preponderance of V5 benchmarks on 2019. And my friend Ryan, he had made it his mission to do all of them, you know, so he was coming over boarding, and I'd join him sometimes. I'm like, sure, I'll try some of these. I mean, some of them like impossible. Yeah. They're super morpho, or they're just so hard. But I'd be inside like watching Netflix or something, and I'd hear him in the garage like just screaming fuck at the top of his lungs. You know, like he'd be like 8 days in on one of these like heinous V5 benchmarks. He's just out there, he's like, fuck. I'm like, you know, you don't have to do all of them. You know, there's not mandatory.
Yeah, there's no prize at the end of doing them all, but if that's become kind of the project. I mean, even when I've interviewed and just chatted with Ravioli, he's like, look, if you're stuck on trying to do like the last handful of benchmarks on whatever grade you're on, you can definitely do 2 grades harder in your style. He's like, you know, like if you're stuck on the last V5, you could absolutely be doing V7s. So that's just kind of the way it works based on style or setter or whatever it is.
Yeah, I think he's right.
I'm interested in that just because as somebody who's been climbing as long as you have, built up a lot of endurance, a lot of movement skill, and we'll get into some of that as we shift to some new chapters here. But just with regard to training, it is interesting that you're still able to get some joy and good progress out of a tool like a moon board, or it could be a TB2 or a woods board or aggressive, there's a lot of them out there, but it's a really hard, it's hard on me. Like when I do a session on that, I really feel it. And sometimes I can get tweaky, and sometimes, I've got a lumbrical thing that happened because I was ripping really hard on a hold and I dropped a finger and it tweaked me a little bit, but I also see the benefits of it. And so kind of bring me to current. How often are you using boards in your training, and what else are you doing? Maybe a snapshot of a week of off the wall training or off the rock training, if you will, compared to, how often you get out.
So I worked with Nina again. So I'd used the same training program she gave me in 2019. Used it for 4 or 5 years without really varying it. And then I started to stagnate, as one does. So I went back and worked with her again this winter and basically told her what my goals were. I was like, look, I need to go to the next level. So she had me on a 3 or 4 month program that was one of the most difficult things I've ever done. It was 4 days a week of training, and each day was probably 5 or 6 hours total.
Oh my God.
Yeah, which was, again, the only way I could fit it in is that I have a lot of these tools here at home. But it was a lot of boarding, max hangs with the tension blocks. I think we moved on to those. They seem to work better, a little more articulation in the wrist. I think less of that kind of just being like that, and, more, you can kind of move stuff around. A lot of
lifting from the ground. You're lifting up plates.
Yeah, exactly. Put dumbbells on them and lift them up. So there was a lot of that, half crimp, full crimp. She had me doing a lot of drop sets with the weights and the pull-ups and the max hangs. So, you do 3 reps at your maximum and then cut the weight in half and do 7 more reps.
Yeah.
Because these routes I'm trying, both of them have a very hard crux followed by a less hard crux, but one segues straight into the other. So the goal was to condition such that you could enter the second crux, still with enough power to get through it. A lot of leg stuff. Nina's big on having strong legs and being able to jump and kip and really push down through your feet and drive, which was new to me. But yeah, I was on the boards 2-3 days a week, a lot of 4x4s. So that, and a lot of free weights and dumbbells. So that ended. But right now, I still moonboard. Even when I'm not quote unquote training, I still moonboard probably twice a week. I find that, especially with the new set, 2024, there's less finger injury risk than with the old sets. And on other boards too, the Kilter board is great for not tweaking your fingers, but keeping your power up. Tension board too, really good too. I just find that, especially at my age, I'm 52, I need to stay on top of the power. I need to not let it diminish. So, right now I'm down 2 rest days right now because I got to split my finger. But tomorrow I'll go in my garage and moonboard, and I'll probably, I have a bunch of circuit walls and I warm up on those and I do some circuits and then I moonboard. And my moonboarding honestly isn't that structured. It's just sort of I save a list of stuff I want to do and I try it, or I set some problems. And then usually towards the end of the session, I will maybe do moonboard 4x4s if I'm feeling pretty frisky. I also have these sort of little routes I come up with where I do these circuits. And then one of the walls, I have a 10-degree overhanging wall, is kind of next to the moonboard. And you can do a however long circuit you want, from 40 to 100 moves, end it at jug there, and then stem over onto the moonboard and then do a moonboard problem that starts on the right. So I'll set problems that start there and go from right to left, or, kind of S their way up the board. And I found that no matter what, however hard or easy the moonboard problem is, when I get there and try to do those problems with a pump on, it's really hard and it makes you really dig. And I think simulates to a great degree what you need to do, redpointing your limit, right? Which is dig really hard when you're tired. So I'll do that. And then I've kept up with free weights, dumbbells, bought an adjustable bench and some adjustable dumbbells to have at home. And probably 3 days a week, I'll do that after a climbing session. I do push-ups and core, so that it ends up being a lot of hours, but because so much of it is right here, literally behind us, I can do it. I can go in, my wife, she's with the kids all day. I can be moonboarding while I'm kind of getting dinner ready, and then they come home, and then we all have dinner, or I make sure that everything's squared away. And then, my wife's getting the kids to bed, and then I'll come in and do the weights and the core or hangboard, all that stuff. So I think one thing you asked about is how does one juggle all this as a dad and, trying to work just like you are and so many of us are. I can't stress enough how nice it is to have a home gym. Like if you're able to do it, like if you're on the fence and, oh, it's a lot of money or I don't quite have the space or it's not going to be as good as the gym, I would say just do it anyway. Because it's also, this gym, home gym, we moved in here in 2012, 12 years ago. I've been like tweaking it for 12 years to get it to what I want it to be. So you don't have to drop all this money all at once. You can set aside a little money every now and then, and every time you have some money, upgrade your gym. Yeah. So over the years, I've added like hang boards and little volumes to the walls, bought new holds here and there, or, friends have brought in holds for the circuit walls, obviously like have the grasshopper wall and put the different moonboard sets on it, just adding to it. But in terms of time, the amount of time you waste driving to the gym, even in a close gym, and then you go to the gym and everyone wants to talk your fucking ear off. And, there's a lot of people that are there to hang out and talk, which is fine, but I'm not. Like, I'm there to climb and then I got to get on with my shit. And you don't have to deal with that at home. And you don't have to deal with being limited by the setting. Like, you're only limited by what you can come up with, which I think is great. Your wall is only as good as you make it. And you can make it whatever you need to have it be for your goals, too. And you can do the exact same thing with the light up walls. You can 100% simulate the crux experience of your project on any of these boards. So I think it's invaluable. And, gyms are great. I still have gym memberships, but unless you're just full of free time or an extrovert, which I'm not either of those, if I didn't have this home gym, I probably would have stopped climbing and training. I'd just been like, fuck it. I can't deal with this.
This episode is brought to you by Boulder Bear's caffeinated gummy bears. Oh my gosh, I love these things so much. Look, I like struggle as much as the next guy, maybe even a little bit more than the next guy, but I also like to have a lot of fun. And nothing says fun like crushing some gummy bears and then crushing your project. I've been using these for months now. They're friggin' awesome. I love that I can perfectly dial in the energy boost that I need. So like each of these little caffeinated gummy bears that are totally delicious, by the way, have 20 milligrams of caffeine in them and 22 milligrams of collagen. So I can dial in the boost that I want. Like if I want to rip some holds off of the TB2 or the boulder sets at my gym, I'll take like 4 or 5 of them and it's like, boom, having a Red Bull, but without all that liquid sloshing around in my stomach. Or if I just want a little bit of a boost, I'll just take like 1 or 2 or like 1 an hour if it's going to be a long day at the crag, and that just keeps me going great. Swing over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/boulderbears to try them out. And if you use code STRUGGLE at checkout, you're going to score yourself 15% off plus a free refillable travel pack. It's cheaper than a Red Bull and way, way better for us climbers. Hit that link in your notes to check it all out.
Let's talk about nutrition. You talked a little bit in the beginning here about how your tactics were a little bit garbage, or at least with regard to hydration and this kind of thing. So we can talk about, currently, or you can look back, but where has nutrition been a struggle for you?
Well, I learned to climb in the mid 1980s and started sport climbing kind of in the late 80s. There weren't that many options until then and into the 90s. And back then, I know you've had multiple guests on and there's so much awareness about it now, but basically that seemed like the number one training tool at that point was an eating disorder. It just, as messed up as that sounds, that's sort of what people did. Some of it I think is climbing to a degree is an aesthetic sport. It's a gravity sport. Some of that's baked in, unfortunately. I'm not saying it's good, but the risk is there, right? Yeah. Has been, always will be. But back then, there weren't the training tools we have now. There was, Dale Goddard and Udo Newman's, was it Performance Rock Climbing, or I think I have the book. Yeah. The classic training book, the Performance, here it is. Yeah. Performance Rock Climbing.
Rock Climbing,
yeah, this was, sort of one of the first big training manuals, and this hadn't even come out yet, or was just coming out. But people didn't really know what they were doing. It was all being invented and everyone was doing their best, but it was sort of like you just overtrained and underate. Right. And that's what everyone was doing. And that's what you saw in the magazines, and the photos in the magazines reflected that. Everyone was very thin, and there's certain little legs and lycra tights.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it wasn't healthy, and it's proven itself to be unhealthy over and over again, and it's something that's still talked about. So I was very much a product of that era, and I fell into that. And I would starve myself, and then of course your body freaks out, and then I would binge eat because my body was calorie starved. And, I got into this really bad cycle, and eventually it led to, anxiety and depression, because you're just unbalancing your system. So it took me a lot of years to get out of that. So that was a big nutritional struggle early on. And, like anyone, I'd see the results, but they're not sustainable. And then you always end up injured or you end up with larger health related problems. And I think that actually sort of affects my nutrition today because I have gut issues from that era and kind of the fallout from it. But now I'm pretty much vegan for the most part. I mean, I guess plant-based, right? Because I'll have some dairy here and there, but I'm mostly intolerant of it. And, if there's like a half-finished chicken nugget on a plate and there's some ketchup there and I'm cleaning up, I will eat it like dad mode,
Right. You're opportunistic carnivore.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Dad scavenging. You're like, well, I could either give this to the dog or I could eat it. I'll eat it. And you're like, all right, I'm not much of a vegan, am I? But yeah, I have, these gut issues. So there's a lot of stuff that I used to eat that I can. And I had to discover this through, basically getting really sick about 8-9 years ago. Finally got like all the allergy tests and worked with a nutritionist and a functional medicine doctor. But yeah, now I try to just sort of eat kind of probably your standard climber diet, like a small breakfast.
You're training live. You're talking about, maybe 4 hours a day, 4 or 5 days a week. You're putting in a lot of strain on the on the body, and it's a huge energy demand. So what does today's fueling look like, whether it's for a big day out at the crag or just, as you're doing a lot of work in the garage?
I kind of eat the same thing every day, regardless.
Dave?
Probably like you, it's a little OCD. I'll have like a bagel and some margarine and some coffee for breakfast and some tea.
Yeah.
And then at lunch, I might actually have the exact same thing at lunch. If it's a climbing day out of the cliff, I usually have like a bobo bar and some string cheese. So carbs plus some protein and little crag snacks. I seem to have a problem with chocolate covered espresso beans. Those seem to be...
There's no problem there.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then I don't have a problem with chocolate-covered espresso beans. And then, I don't know. I know a lot of people like to kind of have something that sticks with them, whether it's a big breakfast or a bigger lunch while they're climbing. But I find that I can't. Like if all the blood's in my gut, I'm just not climbing well. I feel kind of lurpy and, your harness is pushing against you. So I don't eat much during the day. So I usually come home really hungry. And I try to have a really good source of vegetarian protein at dinner. So, maybe I'm going against the wisdom that you need to be spreading stuff more out throughout the day. But I usually have, my family is Catholic. I'm not. So they don't eat meat on Wednesdays and Fridays. So I'll cook big vegetarian meals on those days. So we do a lot of stir fry, a lot of tofu, tempeh. I love Beyond Burgers and Impossible Burgers. I'll often have a salad, still get a lot of veggies, but, there's beans in there, garbanzo beans or black beans, things like that have protein. We do a lot of rice and beans, but to the salad, I'll always add like probably a fair bit of vegan protein. So I think I sort of wait till at night and then kind of try to, like you say, address whatever deficit I've created during the day.
It sounds like you're not getting enough protein still, though. I mean, just based on the amount of work you're doing, you're having a bagel for breakfast and a bagel for lunch. I think you might need to throw in a shake in there or something, Matt. I mean, I'm not a nutritional coach, and this is not an intervention about your daily nutrition, but I mean, you're putting in that much work, dude. I feel like, have a Quest bar or something like that somewhere in there. Have a Fizzy Vantage shake, sponsored.
How about, do you don't think the espresso beans are giving me my protein?
They're giving you some energy. They're probably getting that dopamine. Dude, I love, like right now I'm on this like dark chocolate covered walnut kick right now. And I'm just crushing them nonstop.
Dude.
But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I love tofu. I love beans and all that, but I also don't train like 4 or 5 hours a day. Although it seems to be working for you. It doesn't seem like you're getting injured and you seem to be getting stronger. So,
well, I don't know. I look at the collection compared to yours, like maybe you're honest.
That's just,
you look healthy and ready to go, and I kind of look like, I don't know, like death warmed over. So I don't know. I mean, these have 1 gram of protein in them, so that's pretty good, right?
espresso beans do?
Yeah. So if I eat enough of them, No, you're right.
First
And my
day.
wife calls on me about it. Like, and she always has been. I should, yeah, I'd try vegan protein sources. I used to love tree nuts like you, but I can't eat them anymore of the gut intolerance, not the allergy. So that's actually one thing that I'm sad to have had to give up.
Let's talk about tactics now. Technique, tactics. Man, you've been climbing for a long time. You climb really well. You put up a lot of routes. You've written a lot of articles about crag tactics, do's and don'ts, and biggest mistakes, and all this stuff. So this is rich territory for us to dive into. It's an area where I'm admittedly quite deficient. But although you're an expert, let's start where you've struggled in your tactics or your technique as it comes to climbing.
I think my biggest struggle with tactics is anxiety and pre-Redpoint nervousness.
Well, if that's going to fall heavily into the mental game, we might want to reserve it for a mental game.
Okay. Yeah. What should I address then? In terms of tactics, you mean like actual wall red pointing or?
Yeah, it could be tactics like how you break down a route or don't or whatever.
I think warming up would be a good one because I think, like you say, especially relevant to older climbers because it changes as you get older. I mean, one thing I've noticed is I've been climbing for 37 years. I started when I was 15. I'm 52 now. And one thing I've noticed is that it is harder to warm up, especially if the air temperature is colder, the older you get. I think there's a couple reasons for that. I mean, I think one is just that muscle recruitment, right? You're not as young, you're not as spry, your circulation is not as good. You're just not as raring to go. But I think the other is skin. Your skin loses elastin as you get older. So it's not as supple. It's not as pliable. It's not as kind of moist. So you can be subject to kind of dry, slippery hands. And I think those two things I've had to be a lot more conscious about as I get older. So a lot of my partners will give me a hard time. They're like, oh, you need to do your 5 or 6 warm-ups, or you're not warmed up until hour 3 or 4. And to a degree, they're often right. But one thing I think I've had to do because I have a limited time to climb, some days if we're out, if say I'm on a road trip to the Red where, you can go to a crag and it's stacked and you can be all there all day and you can take forever to warm up because there's a lot of options and there's not as much time pressure. But, around here in the Front Range, routes sort of follow this, usually going to one route and maybe there's not much of a warm up there or the warm up options are limited. And so you have to get creative. The way the climbing is here, it's hard to have like a big, to show up and have like a drive-by crag or something like that. Like you might.
Yeah, we're going from 5.8 to mid 5.13 and you can just kind of work your way up until you're ready to peak.
Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. So what do you do in that scenario? If you're going out to work on the mid 5.13 or the 5.14 project and there's not much around, how are you getting warmed up?
Well, I've definitely had to be very deliberate about it and put a lot of thought into it because I was having bad results because I wasn't warmed up or I'd get injured, trying too hard when it's cold or I'm cold. I've started bringing a tension block every time. And I think, honestly, that, I would see my buddy Brian and he would sort of pull on a block. And then you get on these routes, and he's younger than me, but he'd get on these routes, they're hard, 5.13 plus, 5.14. And he'd pull on his tension block for 5 or 10 minutes and get on him and start going bolt to bolt and doing moves. And I'm like, how does he do that? Like, he's going from 0 to 60. And then I was like, you know what? I'll try it. And I think that actually has helped. You get around the problem of not having the blood in your hands by doing that first. I think, the thing I was talking about being older and having slick skin and not very good circulation. I think using a little portable hangboard like that as kind of your first thing gets that circulation going. And then once your circulation is going, you're able to get on the rock and actually get muscular recruitment. So yeah, these days, I've been going to the same route now for 2 months. There's not that many routes on that wall. I go up there. We all kind of pass the tension block around. There's a 512 up there. I'll get on it. I'll do it twice. And then I'll get on my project and go bolt to bolt. So it's usually like a 3. What I found is really good and efficient, and I think works, is sort of a 3-part warm-up. It's the tension block, the work on the ground, whatever you do. So maybe it's windmilling your arms, maybe it's stretching, all that stuff, a little bit of yoga to get the blood going. Then it's get on a route, isn't near your limit, but is hard enough to see some recruitment. And then get on your project and go bolt to bolt. And I think with the second 2 phases, you got to set your ego aside. I think it's easy to be like, oh, this route's 11C. I don't fall on 11C and push through and get totally flash pumped and screw up your day if it's cold or you're cold or the route's hard. And it's just dumb. I mean, you're just warming up. So if it's not going well, just hang. And then if you get on your route and you can't do moves that you could easily do last time because you were probably warmed up, don't get frustrated. Don't be up there like, I can always do this move, and I think so setting that kind of stuff aside and just being pragmatic about your warm up. Like literally, I'm here to warm up. I mean, I think about other sports, like, I'm sure weightlifters have to warm up to their hardest deadlift. They probably don't go in there and have a fit when the warm up deadlifts don't feel as easy as they should. They probably just sort of get on with it. So yeah, I think just having a sort of practical attitude, like this is what I need to do to warm up. I don't really care how it feels. I'm just going to do it, whatever it takes to start feeling good in my body.
So then you've gone through that process, and the last part of the warm-up process is bolt to bolt on the proj.
Mm-hmm.
And then how many like good kind of quality rips do you get at that point?
I mean, I think if I'm in shape, I usually get 3 or 4 good tries on a route per day. There's some routes that maybe no more than 2 because the moves are hard or because there's a skin tax, on certain holds. But I think, yeah, if things are going well, 3 or 4 burns. There's certainly been times where I've done a route like on my 4th go of the day, been tired, but what's that?
That's the best.
Yeah, it is.
And that feeling that like 4th go, like I probably don't have it in me. And then like it somehow comes together. It's the best.
Yeah. And you're relaxed, right? Because you're like, I don't have anything in me, but I won't be back for a week. Let's just climb on it. And then somehow you do the thing.
Yeah. So I appreciate the look at the warm up. And I agree. I think it's just become more and more critical for me now in my mid 40s, and also just my project being out of the dark side. Like everything there is hard. So I have been doing like a lot of stuff with like the flashboard and my force board, force gauge on the ground, and then maybe a bolt to bolt. Sometimes I'll walk over to a different crag and do some other routes, but then you've got like the skin tax. So I've been sharing that as part of my experience. Obviously, I've been projecting this for now, started last fall, and we're kind of pushing into the summer. So it's probably going to wait now until the fall for when I'll get back to it for some quality attempts, which I'm fine with. But that's kind of been my longest project. And you brought up that you've been going to this same route here for the last couple of months. And I'm curious tactically how you walk this line or kind of strike this balance between staying fit, staying psyched, making progress, not getting discouraged. I guess part of that might go down into the mental game chapter, but just kind of tactically as you're working on one thing, that's a fairly new experience for me. And what have you learned on this current project or just on other projects that have been longer?
I didn't used to be a big projector. I kind of like to do stuff quickly, or if it was taking too long, I'd get frustrated and bail, which is ironic because I had probably all the time in the world back then, right? I was younger. I didn't have a family and have as many bills to pay. I don't know why. You're just impatient when you're young, I guess. Yeah. But I think it wasn't that hard to shift in that. When I started training and working with Nina, for some reason, it wasn't that hard to shift into a project mentality, because when you train, it's usually with a project in mind. So you build that foundation, and then the route takes as long as it takes. I think that's what training sort of cultivated in me. It's like, I'm training for the specific goal, so who cares how long the goal takes? I'm just going to go there and try. And I think that shifting that mentality has been good. I mean, honestly, who cares how quickly you send something? I mean, to me, it's obnoxious, these Instagram posts, managed a quick tick and surprised myself with a quick send. Let's go fuck yourself. Like, who cares how long it took you? Like, there's actually not that much value in doing something quickly, because clearly it wasn't that hard for you. You're just saying this route that's hard for you was easy for me.
Right.
And it's ego. I mean, Adam Ondra, he didn't say managed to surprise myself with a quick tick of silence. He showed up and put the work in for months and years and did it. And, I don't think he put in actually that many Redpoint burns on the route per se, but that's because he spent so much time working on the individual parts of the line, but he didn't say managed to put it together quickly, because he knows better. And I think that's one thing that has come with maybe climbing longer. It's just takes as long as it takes, and who cares? I'll go up there. So yeah, like I said, it's been a bad spring here, and I've only had 2 or 3 days on there where conditions were favorable for me, like warm enough. And it can be frustrating, but I don't know. I go up there, it's pretty. It's an hour hike uphill. I climb what I can climb. If we end up getting skunked, I come home and moonboard or stop at the gym. Like, I feel very lucky to even go be able to try this route at all, to have the time and financial support and support from my wife and friends to go do it. So yeah, there's times when I get on there and it's not going well and it's frustrating, but then I lower off and a minute later I'm like, okay, regroup. But yeah, tactically, I think just taking the mindset that I want to do this route. You know, you fall in love with the route. I want to do it. Who cares how long it takes? I don't know. I mean, are you finding that with the force? Like, you know, you're some months in, right? It'd be easy to say, why haven't I done this thing yet? I'm frustrated. I'm going to find another route that's a softer tick. I mean, you picked one that's really hard for the grade. So you could just go find something squishy and do it, but you've decided not to. So I guess, yeah, like how have you been able to cultivate and maintain that mindset?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's really helpful for me to hear perspectives like you just shared there, to be honest, because it's such a new experience for me. I'm almost not sure what to make of it, like what I'm supposed to make of it. Because for me personally, there's 2 sides to this. I've made it public. So there's a public side to it. And then there's the personal side. The personal side is I'm still having a freaking blast every time I go out there. I'm inspired by that route. I'm inspired by the movements. It's hard for me, but I know that it's going to be doable. I'm getting stronger as a climber. Every time I think I've got it figured out, it surprises me and kind of spanks me down a notch, you know, like it's just, and there's good people that hang on to that crag. It's really inspiring. So I'm having a blast, and I'm aware that like at some point in time, it'll be over and I'll probably be sad. So I'm trying to be in the moment and being like, yeah, like don't be in a rush to send this thing. The other side is though, there is a little bit of pressure, like, because I've been talking about it. And so, you know, people hit me up every day on Instagram or whatever, like, how's it going with the proj? And you know, I'm not a professional climber, but I think I've gotten a little bit of a taste of maybe what some of the professionals do feel when their project becomes public, and whether they announce it or just like people notice them at the crag. And so, yeah, there's like this interesting kind of 2 sides to it, where part of me does feel like, oh man, I'd really like to make that post where I sent the force so that I could just close down that part of the, you know, stream of input that I'm getting from people. But again, if I take that part out of it, because that's all self-inflicted. I did that on myself. I said, hey, this is what I'm doing, everybody. And I think a lot of people have gotten some value out of that process, and it's kind of on brand that it's been a struggle. So I don't regret having it be public. It's just kind of an added layer of mental game stress, I guess, that's added on top. But if I just look at myself and my own experience of going out there, I do really enjoy it still. And if it waits until the fall, which, you know, at this point, probably because of temperatures, it will, I'll go climb a bunch of really fun stuff in the 90-degree heat and just paddle around and, you know, have a blast this summer and then get back to it in the fall. And I don't think I'll have missed out on anything. At least that's the perspective that I'm trying to hold.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's completely right. Like, the route will be there. You love the route, and it will be sort of sad when it'll be that moment of elation at the chains, and you'll have kind of a buzz on for a few days. But then, yeah, you will be sad because you'll look back on that process and everything you learned, and you realize that's over. But then, of course, you find the next route to apply yourself on. Yeah, but yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, you find a route that you fall in love with. And for me, I really like putting up routes, and, you know, I see a potential line and kind of get curious about it. And then as you go deeper with these routes, you know, a lot of them take days of work to bolt and clean, and a lot of days to figure out beta, you know, when you're the first person up there and the holds aren't chalked. You do fall in love with it. And a lot of them, yeah, it's just, you know what, this is cool, and I'm going to come try this. And I think part of that too is just thinking, why not? Like, what am I in a hurry to do if not this route? You know, what has more merit than this? Nothing. Like, all climbs and all climbing experiences only have merit to the practitioner. So to say, okay, this route's taking me months, and I could have gone, say you're trying a 13B. This 13B took me 4 months. I could have gone and done 10, 12 Ds in that same amount of time. Why does it have more value to go to these 10, 12 Ds other than to say I take 10 hard routes versus I put all my time into this one hard route? And I think that's one thing that's been cool to see shift in the climbing community, is that, you know, projecting, I think, used to be looked down upon. I remember hearing it back in the day at Rival, like, oh, that guy's such a hang dog and he works the shit out of everything and he dials it down. And now, like, I mean, would anyone say that about Adam Ondra on silence? Like, oh, he just dialed that thing down until he could do it? Like, absolutely not. Or Seb Wan on DNA, or, Alex Magos on Perfecto. No one's saying that. Stefano Gasolfi on Excalibur. Like, it's cool. Will Bosey on Burden of Dreams. Like, these guys, they show, A, they show what it takes to do the very hardest routes, but B, they show what it takes for all of us to do the very hardest routes, which is just show up and keep trying until you do it. What else is there?
This episode is sponsored by Crimped. Crimped offers 75 different workouts created by world-class coaches and climbers totally for free, you guys. I've been using Crimped for years to log my finger strength and endurance assessments so that I can see how effective my training has been going. And I also love how easy and motivating it is to program my weekly training right there in the app with loads of proven workouts to choose from so that I can just keep things fresh. Look, if you're a self-coached climber, I am telling you, the absolute best and easiest way that I've ever found to train and stay on track is with Crimped. They group their workouts, y'all, into categories. So endurance, power endurance, strength and conditioning, boom, no confusion. I'm telling you, I use it all the time, and I am definitely far more consistent with my training when I've got the app keeping me honest and on track, and it just feels so good at the end of the week to close out those bars. You can hit that link in your notes or go to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/crimped, CRIMPD, to download it for free and take your training to new heights. Let's talk about shoes for a second here, because this episode is supported by SCARPA, and they just make the absolute best shoes in the game. Oh my gosh, I love them so much. I have been climbing in SCARPAs for a decade now, and I just love the way that they fit and they perform on rock and also at the gym. I've been loving the Instincts, the VSs and the VSRs on my project out at the Red, because they can toe into those little pockets and stand on edges so well. They heel hook like a dream. And then in the gym, as I've been climbing on the moon board and the gym set problems, I've been using their Veloce Ls, the lace-ups. They're soft. Oh my gosh, you can just feel everything. They're super dynamic. I feel really athletic in them. So look, whether you're a weekend warrior like me, who's just trying to get the most out of my time at the gym and out on the crag, or a pro like Sean Rabitou or Nina Williams, Nathaniel Coleman, Alex Puccio, Jordan Cannon, or Matty Hong, holy smokes, what a team. SCARPA's got you covered. They've been sustainably making the best dang footwear for climbers, trail runners, and skiers since 1938. I love my approach shoes. I love my climbing shoes. And I think you will too. Give them a shot. You can shop the whole collection over at scarpa.com. SCARPA, no place too far.
Great opportunity for us to now focus on mental game as these two go hand in hand. And I just love where this train of thought's going. Let's talk about it now. Let's enter through the lens of struggle like we like to do. So where are you struggling with your mental game?
I think the hardest thing for me mentally is pre-Redpoint jitters. And it's not necessarily a fear of falling, although I deal with that. It's gotten better because I put in the work, and it's not fear of failure either, because I don't care about that. Because again, like, I've been failing for years. What's another quote unquote failure? I think it's one thing that I've noticed is that I think the jitters come from knowing, and Heather Widener, I remember working with her on a course and some articles she wrote, and she made a really good point that I hadn't thought about. That she said, one reason we get anxious before an attempt is because we know how hard we have to try. And I think it's finding a way to get into the headspace and the physical space and the neurological space to try your hardest. I think that's the hardest thing for me mentally. When you're standing below a route that is hard for you, and you look up at it and you look at that sea of unending hard moves, and you think about the rest, and you think about, am I going to get it back? And you think about the hard clips. There's a lot, you're looking up this thing that is going to be very difficult for you. It's going to take your best effort. And I think a lot of the jitters for me come from me questioning whether I'm going to be able to give that effort or not, or if I'm just going to give up or sabotage myself somehow. So I think that's my biggest struggle.
A very thoughtful perspective on that. I'm like the kind of the root of the anxiety. I don't think I've ever heard it communicated in that way. This anxiety or this fear around having to call on ourselves to really step up and try as hard. So what do you do to address that?
Honestly, I just pull on and climb and hope that it goes away. It's probably not the best, probably not the most strategic approach, but I think, usually once you begin the action part, it can kind of go away. There's some centering stuff that I picked up from like, Justin Shong, who you had on, and Arno Ilgner, who I worked with when I was at Climbing Magazine on some courses. And obviously I've read everything he's written. There's sort of like the deep breath before you go. There's the focus on like a crystal on the rock or something on the ground. Don't think about what's above you. Like if you've prepared the route, you're now in the execution phase. You shouldn't be like going over stuff in your head because it should be ingrained. I'll try to do that. I'll try sometimes to go off by myself. Like at the crag, it's fun and it's social and you have your banter, but sometimes maybe you just need 5 or 10 minutes of silence. So I'll sort of go off and find a rock and like close my eyes and just try to meditate a little, or do progressive muscle relaxation, where you clench and release each muscle group in your body, like clench for 10 seconds and then rapidly release it. And that actually activates your parasympathetic nervous system a little bit. It's a good tactic for just generalized anxiety. So I'll do that. Sometimes I'll just climb up a bolt or two and then just let go and then lower off and then restart. So sort of like a mulligan, like a deliberate mulligan. Cool. Yeah, I think those are different things I can do. Another thing I'll try to do is, I don't know, it's weird. It's very binary. I think another thing you can do is sort of try to trick your own brain. You can either sort of get into a who cares mindset, like who cares if I send this thing? And then you can kind of be a little bit looser in your attachment to the outcome.
Right.
Or the other thing you can do is, I want this really badly. Like, I want this right now. And I've had that work sometimes. Usually it's when I'm up on the wall and I'm looking at a hold. And sometimes I'll think, I know it sounds cheesy, but sometimes I'll just think, I want you. I want you in my hand. I'll look at it's a handhold. It's this inanimate thing. It's a feature on a rock. And I'll just think, I want you in my hand. And in that moment, it gives you this sort of explosive like reaction, and it's worked. I've had it work like weirdly. Yeah, I don't know.
It is really interesting, this like, because I wrestle with this too, where on the one side, it's kind of nice to be like, it doesn't matter. It's not going, like, I'll come back to it or whatever. But on the other side, you're also trying to activate that full try hard. And that's where like the I want it comes into play. And like, they seem diametrically opposed, but they both could lead to, the intended result, which is either, I guess, calming nerves, performance nerves. It doesn't, it's fine. We're just out here having fun. I'm lucky to have this great day. Practice gratitude, the kinds of things that Hazel Finlay likes to talk about quite a bit and that have worked for me. But then there is that sense of like, no, like I'm going to battle. I'm trying hard. Let's go. And that's maybe evocative of like a Jonathan Siegrist or something like that, where it's just like fucking to the death, let's go. And I don't tend to go that way, but I am interested in that side of things.
I'm not naturally like a high T alpha guy. Like I hated team sports because I just sort of lackadaisical. And it is hard to push yourself. But yeah, I think every now and then you kind of have to fake it. You have to fake that GER if you're not a GER type person. I think boulders are good at it. Like you watch them, and a lot of them sort of naturally do that because all bouldering is trying hard, from start to finish. But if you're more of a sport climber, yeah, I don't know. It's sort of about shifting gears. But I almost thought on this route I'm trying, I almost thought of buying some of those wireless earbuds and like playing death metal. And like, that's not me at all. I've never climbed at the crag with music, and, maybe it'll be distracting. But then again, I get up to this crux, and I sort of have to try till steam's coming out of my ears. So maybe something that would work, it's a temporary shifting into first gear and just flooring it and then kind of shifting back as need be.
I like that. I actually had a climber, I was out on the project the last time I was out, which was a few weeks ago, and she suggested that. And I was like, no, I like to be able to hear my belay or whatever. She's like, put in one earbud and just like rock, like just put on something that's just fucking hardcore. That's going to get you just amped. Uh-huh. And I didn't have a chance to try it. It was like, the plan was like, next time I go. And so maybe I will, or maybe I'll just try it on like some, random fluff route that I'm going to go out on and just see like if I like the sensation. Cause I can see like when I go into the gym and I'm lifting weights, like I'll put on some Rage Against the Machine or something like that. And it will get me fired up, or, I'll just put on some random punk where I don't even know the words, but it just like hits really hard. And yeah, I could see maybe there's a value of that on the route. I've never really thought about doing it on like the route, but of course the technology exists to be able to do so.
Yeah.
Well, let me know if you try it, let me know, and then maybe I'll give it a go.
I'll report back to you. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right? Like we do it in the gym all the time. So like, why not at the Rock? I mean, you can do it now without bothering other people. So
Yeah.
maybe worth a shot.
Well, hey, I don't want to slow us down too much here. And if this is like a little bit too much of a left turn, just let me know. But we've been talking about anxiety. We're in the mental game chapter. You had a chapter of your life that you've, wrote a book on, Death Grip, and has been, quite publicized with an addiction to benzos. And is that something that you'd want to touch on for a moment here in the mental game chapter?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in my 20s, I think partially as a result of that eating disorder and just emotional constipation, for lack of a better word, I developed pretty bad anxiety attacks in my early 20s. Probably a lot of it was nutritional. I mean, come to think of it, this was back in the 90s. No one was eating fats. And if you don't eat fats, your neurotransmitters go haywire. You start to I had this sort of constant sense of dread interrupted by panic attacks. And as a result of that, I, have been and was prescribed psychiatric medicines, including benzodiazepines, which are tranquilizers. Those include Valium and Ativan, Xanax, Klonopin. They're effective drugs at knocking out anxiety temporarily, but they're also extremely dangerous, very habit-forming, addictive over the long term. They build habituation, and they create a bad anxiety cycle in which each dose wears off, and then anxiety gets worse, and you need more and more. So I got in a real trap with that, other substance abuse stuff, but I haven't, long story short, like I haven't taken benzos or any psych meds since 2006. So we're coming up on 20 years. I don't drink, I don't do any drugs, anything like that. But because of that period, it certainly affected my nervous system. I think more and more is emerging about the long-term damage these drugs do. There's films out there now. There's medicating normal and as prescribed. A lot of this stuff is documented online. There's big books about it. There's Anatomy of an Epidemic. I'm just looking over here. I have a whole bunch of books. I mean, if someone's willing to look into it, you can find a lot of resources to talk about the dangers of these drugs. But, one thing they left me with is sort of this invisible injury, which is a hyper sort of attenuated nervous system. It's just very responsive to things. And I think it still affects me to some degree. I still have some trouble breathing because of it. Like my vagus nerve can kind of get off kilter. And I'm not breathing well from my diaphragm. So I have a little bit of asthma, which affects me on the Rock to a degree, but usually goes away once I'm climbing. But I think it does, that sort of nervous system hyperactivation certainly feeds into kind of the jitters below the wall and on the Rock. And it's gotten way better over the years. Like if you ask my climbing partners, there's been times where it was crippling, or, fatigue and things like that were crippling. And it slowly continues to get better, but it's certainly something that factors in. I think the main thing is just the main lesson there, I think, is, there's a lot of lessons, but I think, the main lesson probably for all of us would just be that there's a lot of invisible stuff that you can't see in other climbers that they might be dealing with and that we all deal with. Someone maybe has had great loss in their life or horrible tragedy, or maybe they have, a disability of some sort that's not completely visible or is visible, that affects how they're able to show up to climb. And I think just giving our own selves the grace to accept that, and others to not judge, is important. Climbing, if you want to climb hard, it's hard. And if there's, it's never as simple really as just showing up and pulling on the Rock. We have our lives off the Rock, and those come with us, I guess, when we're up on the wall. I think that's the point I'm trying to make.
From what I've read, it was obviously an incredibly challenging time for you and your family. And though I haven't experienced it firsthand, my wife experienced it to some extent, being prescribed Klonopin and being told that it wasn't habit forming, and then forming like a multi-year, dependency on it. And then it was a multi-year. I was with her in the process where she came off of it, and it was a really scary and challenging time, multi-year process. And I think the point that you're making there is just, you never know when you're meeting somebody at the gym or the crowd or whatever, kind of what they've dealt with or what they are dealing with. And certainly those that fall, the drugs that fall into the benzo category, you've written extensively on. If people are interested in that, they can look up your book and some of the others that you just cited. But It could be any number of other things. Like you've said, we've all got our own baggage that we arrive with. And so a little bit of grace with people can be nice. And I am curious now, because you said you haven't, and congratulations, it's been, 20 years, I think you said, since you've come out the other side of that chapter. You also, it sounds like, you don't drink or are doing any other drugs or anything like that. And so some of the tools that might be typically available for us to deal with a particularly stressful day or week or year or whatever it is, you've been able to cut out some of the crutches, I guess, that we might lean on. But what other tools, what healthier tools are you using to handle when you have those higher anxiety days or higher stress days to deal with that?
That's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, most of us, I'm going to take my CBD gummies, or I'm going to have a drink or whatever. Those avenues aren't open to me, nor would I really want them to be. I don't like being, psychoactively, like metamorphosed by outside things. I'm just not into it anymore. I did enough drugs, basically.
Right.
I don't like to be fucked up anymore, but I walk a lot. I think that's huge for me. And, I think a lot of people, I'm really lucky, like on our back area, there's a forest and a green belt, and there's a trail right there, 50 feet from here, just across the ditch. So
cool.
Like this morning before the interview, I just got out with my dog Cody, and we took like an hour and quarter walk, trees, ditches, birds, ducks. I mean, just really nice. And yeah, I woke up like a little anxious today. The alarm kind of jarred me and startled my nervous system. Yoga is the other pillar of that. I think yoga, more than climbing and walking, for me has been the anxiety killer. I can just do it and I will get relief, like pretty 5-10 minutes into a practice. It doesn't last all day, but it certainly goes away during the practice and for some hours thereafter, and is enough, I think, for a reset. But I think those two things have been huge, and they were a huge part and have been a huge part of my healing. Like I said, I haven't taken any psych meds since 2006, but I was very sick for the first 2-3 years after that. And then in 2013, I had a big setback, which was almost worse. So that was 11 years ago. And, and both of those experiences, I mean, as you probably saw with your wife, the symptoms are bizarre. They're wide ranging. They're often crippling. You're often confined to your house because of agoraphobia and irrational fear. You're not sleeping. I mean,
totally.
You might be having hallucinations, just really terrible stuff, kind of like a bad acid trip. But not being able to move your body is sometimes part of that. There's been people I know who've been through benzo withdrawal, been so weak they couldn't even go, bathe themselves. They needed caretakers. Your muscles just get watery and these things. So, and both times I've had to really gradually build back. And both times I had to leave climbing behind too for months, sometimes years. I think the longest I've had off was maybe 1.5 years from climbing. So I had to find something to do. And yoga's nice because, like climbing, you can really calibrate it. You can do yin yoga and keep it chill. You can do a slightly more active practice. You can do power yoga. You can do Ashtanga. It can be as difficult as you want. You can, do sort of Mysore style yoga where you're just going through flows yourself. And being able to do that has been huge. And I think that of immense benefit for rock climbing in terms of strength, balance, centering, breath, spatial awareness, proprioception, all those things. I mean, most of the people you've had on your podcast seems like they do yoga or some form of it. Look at how that Alex Magos, that Road Punk video. I mean, he's obviously like an impressive yogi, and you can see how it translates to the rock. So I think that has probably been my biggest tool. I actually worked at Yoga Journal for some years, and it was cool. They paid for us to do a teacher training, like a 200-hour teacher training, kind of the most basic form, but it gave me the toolbox to really make this part of my life, I think, for the rest of my life.
Oh, it's so great to hear. This conversation for me is just like ripe with signposts for things I should be paying attention to. And that's certainly one. I had done yoga for some time and got away from it, and probably time to get back to it.
Do it. I mean, mid-40s, start. Have you had Boone Speed on?
No, but I'd love to have him on. Yeah, for sure.
Boone's the man, and he is diehard yoga. And he was injured and really fucked up for many years, like had to leave the sport behind and basically repaired himself through yoga. Yeah, he'd be a great guy to talk to about it.
let's move on to our last chapter here of this part of the episode and talk about things that you're working on, things that you're passionate about beyond climbing, beyond, fitness, that kind of thing. I'd love to talk about just the landscape of climbing media. And, you've got a great perspective on that, where it's been, where it's at, where it might be going, and kind of this age of influencers and the democratization, if you will, of reporting, for better or worse. So that may be a great place for us to jump into, but I want to open it up to you as well. Anything else that you might be psyched on?
Wow, that's a big, a big topic.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything per se. No. Would you like me to talk about the climbing media?
Yeah, let's do that. I've got a couple other things on here I might hit you with as well. But
Okay.
yeah, I'm interested in climbing media coming from, in my mid-40s, and it was like magazines, and then you'd wait for the films to come out or a film festival to come around and this kind of thing. And now, obviously, it's shifted by light years, but there is still that traditional sense of media. How long is it going to hang on? I don't know. You've just got such a front row seat for all of this. And it would take us a separate podcast to just explore this for all that it could be. So what strikes you, or what would you want to communicate to the listeners here about climbing media, where it's at, where it may be going, and what we might want to be either wary of or just, focusing on and paying attention to as we consume climbing media?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly an interesting time in climbing media. Like I said, I started climbing in the 80s. And at that point, the only information about climbing was print. There was no internet. There was just guidebooks and the magazines. And in North America, there was Climbing and Rock and Ice. And I mean, we would devour them. I mean, the same way we all devour climbing content now. When you're a passionate climber, you love climbing content, right? You love to think and hear about dream routes and dream destinations and what other climbers are doing. And it was the same back then. It's always been about storytelling. And so I, came of age, looking at these magazines. As soon as they'd come out, we would be at the gear shop, leafing through them. And then, if I had a little money, I'd save my lunch money, I'd buy one and take it home, and had a big stack of climbings and Rock and Ice at home.
Yeah.
And, until the print magazines sort of held that position of importance, really until sort of Internet 2.0, which I don't know, we could say is how old's Instagram now? 10, 15 years, something like that. And I think then there started to be this kind of falling away. A lot of it was economic, there was less ad support. Climbing Magazine in its heyday had ad support from non-endemic advertisers. You had people like Ford and Rolex advertising in there and buying these big, beautiful, full-page, the 2-page spreads. The magazine was 150, 160 pages. And then you look over the years, there's less ad support, there's fewer subscribers, the magazines are getting thinner and thinner. It's the same trend that's in print. But I think one thing that is really interesting about this shift away from print is that climbing has always been an extremely visual sport. So our storytelling, even back in the day, even when it was the written word, the best climbing writing was climbing writing that was imagistic and painted a really vivid picture in your head. So, the classic mountaineering books like The White Spider or Into Thin Air or Conquistadors of the Useless really put you in these places and in these experiences. And then climbing photography has always been a big part of our storytelling too. And you had, the first wave of groundbreaking climbing photographers, Greg Eberson, Heinz Zach, Jim Thornburg, Beth Wall. These people were showing the world things that hadn't really been seen before Simon Carter. They would rappel into these places that are accessible only to climbers. They'd push themselves away from the wall with stilts. You can do that now with the drone, but there's high risk, strenuous work to get these incredible images. And so I think as climbers, we've always been hooked into that imagistic thing. I think one thing that's very cool about the new media is that it's better than ever in that sense. YouTube, I watched YouTube climbing videos every day. It doesn't matter. Sometimes I just watch the crappiest, some kids went out and they're stoned off their ass and they filmed themselves with IPhone and there's some crappy music and I'll watch it because it's tickling that itch, right?
Right.
It's this is cool. These guys are climbing. But there's some very polished, excellent films on YouTube that people are making and putting out there. I mean, essentially for us for free. I mean, like, you know, Anna Hazelnut is an example. Like, I started watching her channel 3-4 years ago, and you can see her evolution as a filmmaker, you know, from these kind of like DIY sort of putting it together things where she was living in Europe trying to Redpoint some stuff to these, you know, full blown like masterpiece climbing films. And it's cool. And okay, so yeah, I guess that in a way takes away money from traditional print media, but what would you rather do? Would you rather, you know, read an article that might have a photo or two, or watch a 15-minute video that's full immersion? So I think that's cool. I think Instagram had that to a degree, but it feels like there's an exhaustion there. Maybe it's just my own personal exhaustion, but sort of an exhaustion with the green check mark and the here's how long the route took me, and here's a little bit of lip service to some, you know, social cause, and here's a little bit about my emotional state. It started to feel sort of formulaic and tired. But I think, yeah, I mean, the opportunity for, you know, DIY sort of democratized filmmaking. And yeah, I guess Instagram to a degree. I mean, you can take a pretty good shot right on your phone and post it. And it's certainly given me ideas about crags to visit and places to go. Like even in the Red, like, you know, I was out there for 6 weeks in 2002, and, you know, I'd just be trolling through my phone and would like look at stuff the locals had posted. I'd be like, oh, I haven't been to that crag, you know, I'll go check that out. So yeah, I think that's one thing that's been really cool. Like the visual tradition is probably more alive than ever. What it's meant for print media is another matter. I work as a freelance editor now. I was laid off from climbing in May 2022, when the owner, parent corporation Outside Inc. shuttered a bunch of print titles. You know, so climbing's still there, and I know they're still doing the same storytelling, it's just in an online form. You know, kind of the same stuff the mag's always done, climbing and rock and ice and merge. So that's cool, but I don't know where
Yeah, I mean, let me just interject for a second, because I think you brought up a really cool and maybe a surprising perspective, because it doesn't seem like you're clinging to, you know, the heyday of print. You're still a storyteller. You're still, you know, writing fantastic articles, as you said, freelance now. But you brought up Anna Hazelnut, who I've had on the show, and she and I, in fact, just talked yesterday about a project she's working on. And, you know, there's others out there who are creating some really thoughtful, creative, interesting content. And ultimately, they become the recipient or the beneficiary of the money rather than the big publisher. And so she's able to then fund her next trip. And so there's an interesting sense for me as somebody who maybe is, as I am, part of her Patreon, you know, membership for $6 a month or whatever it is, you know, to be able to essentially individually be funding those trips. Or, you know, I'm a content creator myself making this podcast, and people can support me on Patreon, or I get ad revenue from sponsors who place ads, and then people can listen to those ads and buy those products or not or whatever. And I'm able to keep making this show here in my basement. And so it's become democratized in a sense, but I'd love to get your thoughts. And so it's interesting that, like, A, you recognize that you consume it all and you support it all, because one might think at a glance that you would be a curmudgeon and say, no, it's, you know, all this stuff that's coming out is, you know, it's not at the level that it should be. And also, by the way, you'd be right in saying that. But I'd love to hear the other side, if you have also a foot in the other side, as it relates to, you know, instantaneous spray, if you will, or just reporting. A thing happens and boom, it's out. You don't need to wait for the film. You don't need to wait for the article that was researched and verified. And then you've gotten some quotes from others who were there, and you get to paint this beautiful picture. It's just like, oh, you know, Will just sent Return to the Sleepwalker, and here's the post, and here's the thing. And yeah, a film will come out in like 4 months or something like that. But there isn't that anticipation like there used to be, you know? And so I don't know, like, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm not trying to feed you an opinion, but I'm curious if you are torn, or if you see kind of the other side of that.
Well, I think the downside of it, like you say, is spray, just the ocean of spray. It's hard to distinguish spray from storytelling when there's so much content. And I think there's a difference. I mean, it's kind of like the classic Supreme Court definition of pornography. You know, I can't really define it, but I know when I see it. I mean, I'd say the same thing about spray. I couldn't, you know, what's the difference between a top climber saying they did the hardest thing in the world and Joe Blow saying I did my 15th double-digit problem? Like, who's to say which one is spray and which isn't? But there's an innate feeling to it. So I think it can be hard to wade through the content to find what's interesting. And that instantaneous thing, I think, leads to, it's a carrot on a, not necessarily a carrot on a stick, but it's a shiny bauble. Like it's something that would tempt anyone. And I think it's easy to fall into that trap. I mean, you can be just a workaday dad like me. I can get on Instagram and just start spraying about all this stuff I've done and get a little dopamine hit, right? And I think we've all fallen into that trap to a degree, or we all can. Anyone can. It's seductive. But yeah, I think the best content still has storytelling at its heart. And sure, I guess I could be bitter and say, the internet killed print and I lost my job and blah, blah, blah. But one thing that I have seen happen is, okay, there's this huge online circus. There's tons of content. There's all these people climbing hard. What's interesting, what's not. That I think is subjective. You just pick what you're interested in the sport and who you're interested in, and you follow them, and you don't follow the other people. There's been people I've unfollowed who are good climbers and pro climbers who might have something to offer, but I just didn't click with the tone of their posts. It always seemed to be all about them, and there wasn't much thought put into the larger picture. And I'm not saying they need to go on and on about Israel and Gaza or social justice. No, there just isn't much of a sense of the human story. But I think one thing that has happened that's kind of cool, it's sort of like this return to vinyl and nostalgia for artisanal things, is that, there are niches where print is still alive and well, like Alpinist, and then, Summit Magazine, Michael Levy brought it back and it's doing well. And that still has that long form classic storytelling, adventure journal. I still get all those in print. And I love them. I love to read them. So I think that's still there too for people who want kind of a slower approach. I mean, yeah, in terms of the instant spray, I don't really know what the solution is other than you just follow the people whose storytelling you like, because you can be overwhelmed by hard ascents and young climbers doing this and that and the other. And at a certain point, it just becomes meaningless. But in a way, it's probably better than it used to be. I mean, back in the day with the magazines being the only portal for information, by the time you heard about a descent, it happened like 4 months ago.
Right.
And it might not have, you could be like, world's hardest route goes down, and then you pick up the bag. And since then, 2 of the new world's hardest routes have been done.
Right.
So it was archival in that sense as a record of a snapshot in time, but it wasn't, a living record. It couldn't really be updated on the fly. So, maybe that's a good thing. And then, like you say, it seems to me like the people who are creating the best content, who also happen to be those climbers, they're savvy about it. They'll trickle a little something out, or maybe even catch that live stream if it's, Will Bosey's got his phone pointed at himself while he's trying, burden. But the full polished, realized storytelling piece doesn't come out for some months later. And to me, that's the interesting part. And that's where there's the anticipation. So I think that's kind of cool too. There's still some holding back of the full story.
That's a good point, actually, is like the news happens, you understand that an event happened, but then the full immersive reporting of it or the experience of it could take some time. I mean, it was Stefano Zolfi. It took almost a year for Excalibur, the film, to come out, but it was freaking rad, it's not like it wasn't worth the wait. It was like really a great experience when it finally came out. Maybe that's good for us in this instant society, is actually to be forced to wait and have that, what's the marshmallow experiment? You get to eat 2 marshmallows if you have a little bit of self-control. So yeah, to put a little bit of a bow on this chapter here, who do you like? You are very thoughtful. I think you've, as a tastemaker in this area with regard to storytelling and reporting, who out there is putting out content that you think is worthwhile and that we should all be checking out if we're not already?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, like I said, I think most of it is probably on YouTube right now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the best content is there. I mean, there's certain channels that I seem to follow no matter what. I mean, there's Anna Hazelnut, there's Adam Ondra, Magnus. I don't watch all his stuff because a lot of it's gym stuff, which gets repetitive. But, it's funny, like where he dressed up as himself and went to Australia, or when he, pretends to be this sort of like goober and, has these climbing lessons or gets in with these groups. I mean, that stuff's really funny. Yeah, I think Stefano Ghisolfi's channel's funny. He's got a good sense of humor.
Yeah, he does.
I'll watch Alex Magos' stuff every now and then. It's very German and kind of esoteric and cool. I mean, who else is doing good stuff? Climbing stuff? You ever watch him?
Yeah, I just climbed with him at the Red recently. He's like a couple hours from me, Brandon. Yeah, let's talk about some kind of sardonic content there.
Yeah, I mean, it's
he's funny.
hilarious, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that might be some of the best climbing humor I think I've ever had. He doesn't give a fuck, and he just says whatever's on his mind, and it is classic. I mean, it's like the kind of shit talking that when I worked at the magazine, you wished you could do, but you're like, I'm going to piss off someone, and we're going to lose advertisers. But he doesn't care. He's just standing in front of his video game, collection wall with his Fallout dolls and stuff, just riffing. I mean, it's amazing.
He's great.
Yeah, I'm sure there's others. I mean, I have so many.
Do you watch any of the White Boys stuff? Well, I love Pete and Tom's relationship is freaking hilarious to me when they're just riffing about O grades or whatever. I mean, the climbing's fantastic and they're obviously just incredible at what they do, but also just when they're shooting the shit, I just am always laughing my ass off.
Yeah, I like them a lot too. Yeah, there was Climbers Crag, but I think it's gone now, but maybe it's still there. I watched the shit out of moonboarding videos.
Oh, yeah.
Especially when 2024 set was coming out and no one in America had them yet. I watched some of those UK, everyone in the schoolroom. I must have watched those 6 or 7, 8 times, just looking at the holds, geeking out, oh, I wonder how that pinch is.
Yeah.
So I'll watch the shit out of moonboarding. I know it's dumb. It's repetitive. It's just these guys jumping around on the same holds that I have in my garage. But yeah, I think wedge climbing is really good. Dave McLeod. I mean,
Dave puts out great content, really well-produced, thoughtful content. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, he's so thorough, right? He's exhaustive in his thought and documentation. And it is such core content. I mean, he's out there with his shirt off. It's 40 degrees. It's raining sideways. And he's trying some heinous V14 way up alone on a hillside in Scotland. It's this is climbing. This guy will go climbing no matter what, and he's going to share his experience. Yeah, I think that's very real. I think wedge climbing is cool. You see, those strongest British climbers doing these crazy feats.
Do you watch the Mellow guys? Do you check in with those guys ripping holds off?
Yeah, I think I've watched every Mellow video. Yeah, I think Mellow's great. I mean, I think what they did it's important, right? I mean, I'm old as fuck, and I was one of the gatekeepers at those magazines for years, and I remember Daniel Woods. Yeah, we tried to do stories with him, and I think he made the point. He's like, you guys aren't really covering what we're doing. And he was right. I mean, and a lot of it was we were limited by our format. And they just went out and figured out, let's just do this ourselves. Let's just film ourselves and make our own videos with this kind of punk rock, skateboarder ethos. And they nailed it. And it needed to be them, right? It shouldn't be someone like me who's in his 50s, okay, how do we appeal to the kids who are doing the bouldering? You know what I mean? It's just... It's pandering. So yeah, I think Mellow is great. It's authentic. Yeah. And you're seeing the world's strongest climbers doing these things that video of, I think floating was on there, right? The first time that was ever shown.
Yeah.
I mean, you watch that and it doesn't really matter how hard you climb. I mean, it's mind boggling. It just blows your mind.
Crazy.
Yeah. Crazy. The strength and the creativity it took to do that boulder problem. And yeah, I mean, the other stuff they've had on there, Megatron, Alphane, I mean, Return of the Sleepwalker, just all the stuff. It's sick.
I just had a conversation with Carla Traversi, and we're just talking about some of these kind of mega boulders and capturing them. And it's I couldn't even put my hands on the holds and hold on. And then you watch these guys and girls, men and women, probably more politically correct, doing these things. It's absolutely mind-boggling, but it's also, really, it's not just entertaining. It's really motivating. I don't know. It's just really freaking rad to see people climbing at that level.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's high octane climbing, right? And it can't help but sort of push you to, you're all right, next time I'm out, I can tell I've only been trying 70% because look at how hard these folks are trying. And yeah, it gives you a good kick in the ass to go try a little harder.
Yeah, man, I'm psyched. Well, I'm going to be tucking into some of that here soon and getting into a training session. I'm pulling a Matt today. I did a morning workout. I'm going to do an evening training session. So I'm going to get myself properly hyped up. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on? Anything else that you wanted to share? This is such a joyful conversation for me. This is one of my favorite interviews I've done in a long time. I loved it.
No, well, thank you. That's kind of you to say. No, this is a lot of fun. I'm trying to think. No.
Anything you want to plug? What are you working on?
These days I work as a freelance editor. I guess I would just plug a couple of publishing houses I work for. I work for Mountaineers Books freelance and D'Angelo freelance, and both of them are putting out good, proper climbing books, from how-tos to memoirs to collections of essays. They're kind of in that vein of that old school storytelling and literary tradition that's alive in our sport. And I would just say, yeah, pick up those books. I'm excited to pick up Beth Rodden's new book. I read all day and edit for a living, so I'm very slow to read now, which is unfortunate. It takes me months to get through a book, but I'm psyched to pick up her memoir.
Really good, man. It's really good.
Good.
And it's on audio. I mean, if you're taking hour-long hikes, on the trails across the way with the dog, I listened to it. I was on a road trip with a family coming back from Florida on spring break, and I crushed through it on a 10-hour drive. And she's a hell of a writer. I think you're going to enjoy that one.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'd be psyched. No, I've worked with Beth before. I was at the magazine. She's always a very thoughtful, diligent, conscientious writer. So I'm sure her book's amazing. And what a story she has to tell. I just finished one book. I think I've worked on a few memoirs this year coming out from different places. Patagonia, I've worked with them too. They're still putting out books.
Oh, cool. I've liked their books. They put up like thoughtful, interesting angles and stories.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, hard for me to plug any one book. I think one that stands out that I did recently was Thomas Huber's memoir was translated from the German.
Cool.
Into English. And it is fucking cool. Like, I remember seeing it when it came out and just thinking, bummer, it's in German. Him and his brother have always been fascinating to me for just their sort of sense of adventure, the fact that they climbed together as brothers, the spirit they brought to El Capitan. And they both still climb hard. Like, they still push themselves. They're a couple of years older than me. Yeah, but his book is just a great piece of adventure storytelling. I think it'll connect with a lot of people. Yeah.
Cool.
I would check that out.
Yeah, we will. And well, of course, we'll continue to check out the pieces that you're putting out. Really appreciate your contribution to the sport, to media, and I'm just hyped. I'm hyped for where you're at with your climbing as well, because it gives me a lot of hope for what I am going to be able to hopefully accomplish here over the next few years. So thanks for bringing all of it, man. Just such a joy to chat with you today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. My pleasure, Ryan. Thank you for having me on.
And that wraps up a nice conversation there with Matt Samet. And man, I just really enjoyed how open and authentic and just totally kind of vulnerable Matt was in this conversation. Matt, thank you for sharing your stories, for dipping back into the life of a climber in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, and the struggles that you have gone through and what you're doing to work through those. Just really a very personal conversation here, and also quite psyched for me as a fellow weekend warrior, as a dad, to hear how hard you're able to train, to hear how you're projecting and the stoke that you have around that. I just loved all of it. I hope you guys did too. And there's actually quite a bit more from Matt that we've got. We recorded a totally separate bonus episode. We just had so much more to talk about. So in that, Matt talks through his moonboard progression from V3 to V8. I am solidly on the low end of that, and so I found that very interesting. He talks about all the boards and how he thinks they stack up against one another. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the benefits of building a home wall and having that set up right at home. He talked about that in this interview here, but he actually goes into like bang for your buck. How can you make something like this a reality? And I think that's super useful. He's also written some articles on that. We talk about gear reviews and whether gear reviews are bullshit or if they're real, and what his thoughts are around gear. Family-friendly climbing destinations, outdoor etiquette and safety from a book that he wrote called The Crag Survivor's Guidebook. There's so much in this bonus conversation. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 60 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here, plus pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month, or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love ya. Big thanks and appreciation to all of our show sponsors who have brought you this episode here at zero cost. Way to go. You can check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners, and there's some great discounts there, so check them all out. Actually, you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glen Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. And you know what? I want to shout out another podcast right now, the Enormocast. You guys know the Enormocast probably. I was a guest on it. Chris Kalous, who hosts the Enormocast, was a guest on The Struggle. Anyway, Chris has been having some really interesting conversations over at Enormo recently, and I just recommend you check them out. You're at the end of this episode. You might as well tee up your next episode and check out the Enormocast. He's interviewed Matt Samet, so if you want to dig more into the Matt Samet world, you can do that. He also has, and this is timely because the Olympics, he's had a guest that I've been trying to get on forever, Janja, Garnbret. I can't get her, but Chris got her, so maybe check out that one. I'll link to both of those episodes actually in the show notes to make it easier on you. Enormo is a fantastic podcast. I hope you guys enjoy it, and I hope your training and your climbing are going great. And if you're struggling like me, well, at least we know that the struggle makes us stronger. See y'all.